trail to shake the cobwebs free. As we get to the top of the mountain, there's a view. Take a load off and crack a few mountain brews. Mountain brews, sweet mountain brews. Mountain brews, sweet as morning dew. Have another brew as we look out over the town. The highway's far away, it ain't making a sound. All of the buildings look like dominoes. Wouldn't take much for them to topple and go. So here we sit, soaking up this view. Oh, let's head down, we're out of those mountain brews. Mountain brews, sweet mountain brews. Mountain brews, sweet as morning dew. Mountain brews. Mountain
Whiskey River, take my mind. Don't let her memory torture me. Whiskey River, don't run dry. You're all I got, take care of me. Whiskey River, take my mind.
What'd I miss?
Nothing, we're just hanging out till the meeting starts.
Okay.
I think Frank's trying to give us a countdown.
Are we good? All right, let's go. Good evening. This is our May virtual meeting. First, quick reminder, even though I do have a slide about it, if you are not an officer, please mute your microphone and raise your hand if you have a question, and or use the chat and we will read your question off during the meeting. Next slide. It's exciting to see all these people here. This is like one of the biggest Zoom meetings that we've had in a while. This is cool. So everyone, let us know what you're drinking besides the awesome samples that we have coming up and let us know. Meh. So at least through June, or maybe once a week during the month from now on, we are going to be doing some virtual happy hours. In the next slide. Here are our upcoming events. I do have some good news on that front. On June 3rd, we will be having an in-person happy hour at the Gaslight. We're super excited for that. And then Parkville is in October, and Brewfest is also in October. Next slide. Okay, here's the official slide. Please respect people's speaking times, so please remain muted and wave your hand or put something in the chat, which I will do my best to check. It looks like Brian and Nikki is drinking Monk's Dark Ale, which, what brewery is that from? I haven't heard of that one.
From Abbey Brewing Company.
Oh, cool.
No idea where it is. It was part of the holiday exchange thing.
Oh, nice.
Back exchange, yeah.
Okay, moving on. We have some co-chairs signed up for Brewfest, which is awesome. So we have Steve Brown, who has done our music for the last several years, and Mr. Jay Brunker, who is new. That's exciting to be able to do that partnership so that new people will learn how this works. Then we have Frank and Jake working on the beverage and organizing that. Matt Bechtold signed up to do logistics, and we still need a person to learn from him on how that works. He also did literally write a book about it, so that's helpful. And then we still need someone to work with Ryan Metcalf for Saturday food. But so far, we have people signing up, which is great. So we can start getting this all organized soon. And here is the sign up link should you want to volunteer. Also, as a reminder, to participate in Brewfest and buy tickets, you must be paid up by the end of June. Next slide. We have the beer competition also that needs to be organized. So far, we have Ryan and Matt and me and Jake, and we need one more person to help with everything that needs to be done. I will create a sign up for that shortly so that you can just do it that way. Next slide, please. I also want to encourage you to check out the Equipment Share Network we are starting up. We have a lot of awesome stuff on there already. And you have anything that you would like to share on with other members, please let any of the officers know so we can add your information to the spreadsheet and get that started, that network started. Next slide, please. And here's the link so you can look at it and a snapshot of what it looks like. We got some awesome stuff on there already, mostly from Ryan and Jake, but that's great. And moving on to Jake.
Okay, thanks, Lynette. We'll start off talking about memberships, and I want to reiterate, if you want to go to Brewfest, you know somebody who wants to go to Brewfest, don't forget you gotta be a paid member by June 30th. So if you know folks who've gone in the past that haven't paid memberships yet, give them a call. Now's the time to get that going. Not to mention all of the member discounts we have on top of that, and basically free beer that we have to go along with the tasting tonight, which is a good opportunity to thank all of our brewers. Everyone donated all of their beer. No one submitted any receipts for reimbursement. So I just want a quick thank you to everybody and their generosity. So really appreciate that. We are at 52 members, which is pretty good. This is just a hair below where we were at this point last year, which actually says a lot because last year we had a couple in-person meetings where I collected most of those memberships during that time. And one last reminder, always use PayPal. That's the best way to go. So, all right, let's talk about financials then for April. So we've been collecting more and more memberships. Really appreciate everyone who's supporting the guild. We got $283.72 come in for that. And then all we've had to pay so far this month is our internet bill. So sitting well positioned for the year. And yeah, I think hopefully before long, we'll be able to get back to in-person meetings and we'll be able to see everybody face to face. But until then, we're doing pretty well with the virtuals. So, and then we can see what the trend looks like. So it's actually a little bit interesting. We've been pretty steady, and I think probably as confidence builds for face to face kind of opening up again, I think we're starting to get more members. But you can see this time last year we were quite a bit lower than where we are now. So that's good to see. And I think that's it for financials.
Great. Just a quick update from the Zoom chat on what people are drinking currently. There is a Funkworks Tropical King Imperial Saison. That sounds impressive. And Lee's got a Hoptic Nerve. And then also William was drinking a 1554 clone, which I would be interested in. And Barry's having a Goose Island IPA. Yay, nice selection. All right, Tara, it's your turn for the library.
So we still have books. They're still at my house. Hit me up if you want to check out a book, or if you want to know what we have, I can send you a list. Nothing's really changed since last month. Haven't done a lot on it. My apologies. I have looked at a couple of possibilities, and I want to make sure we don't have them before I mention anything. So hopefully next month I plan on seeing if there's a couple of new books. That's it.
Okay. Fresh on the forums, nothing too new, just talking about some yeast and the spring homebrew, which is awesome. All right, and Josh, you want to introduce our guest?
Yeah, thank you, Lynette. This month, we are very fortunate to have somewhat of a local celebrity and a professional brewer talk with us about Kavik, depending on how you pronounce that. But with that, I'll welcome Sam McLean, head brewer of Lawrence Beer Company.
Hello. Can everyone give me a thumbs up if they can hear me? All right. Well, first, I want to thank you guys for having me. Before I get into the talk, I just want to say that having a really vibrant homebrewing community in Lawrence is just awesome. So I think you should be really proud of what you do. The beer scene in any town is made by not just the breweries, but the people that enjoy beer, and the homebrewing community is really an important part of that too. So I think it's really awesome that that there's such a vibrant homebrewing community in Lawrence. And 2020 was a really tough year for Lawrence Beer Company. But I was just thinking, as you guys were getting the meeting started and going over financials, what a year to be a home brewer. 2020, you got to, what a skill to have as everything shuts down. So I just was laughing about that as we were getting rolling, because some self-sufficiency, at least you knew that you could have some beer at the end of the day. So yeah, I just go over a few things. My name's Sam. I'm originally from Kansas. I moved to Chicago to go to college. I graduated in 2010 and got a job at a brewery, and then moved to Kansas City and worked at Boulevard for a short time. And then I got connected with the guys at starting LBC. And this is, then I moved to Lawrence, and this is our 4th year in operation. And it's been awesome. So I love Lawrence, and my wife and I just had our 2nd child, and we're going to make this our permanent home. So I don't know if I can officially call myself a Lawrencian yet, but I feel like one. So yeah, it's my 10th year professionally brewing. I started homebrewing about 12 years ago, and LBC's 4th year. So tonight, Josh had asked me to give a talk, and he had some suggestions, and one of them was to talk about the Kvike yeast. And I have used it at the brewery, and I actually had some beer brewed with the Kvike yeast that I wanted to share with everyone, because I thought it would be interesting to taste a beer brewed with the yeast in a way that is not one of the main trends. Right now, people are using the Kvike yeast to brew IPAs. IPAs are the most consumed craft beer style, so they get all the attention. But this talk's going to kind of focus on how to use the Kvike yeast in a lot of different ways. So I think that's good enough for the intro. We'll go to talking about Clark. So everyone hopefully got a sample of Clark. It's a big sample. 32 ounces is sort of the smallest increment that we work in. So don't feel like you need to finish that tonight. I know you're doing some additional tasting tonight. So I wanted to go over what Clark is now in case you wanted to sip on that beer while I do the talk. And then I'll go over the recipe a little bit at the end of the slides. But the goal for Clark, generally I get to brew whatever I want, whenever I want, which is awesome. This beer came about because one of the owners and president, Matt Williams, he really wanted to do a winter warmer that we could release every year around Christmas. So it would be one of our staple seasonal releases in a bottle. So I was sort of tasked with writing the recipe. If you look up the BJCP style guidelines for winter warmer, it's such a huge category. The alcohol percentage ranges from like 5% to 12%. So it was really a blank slate. So my goals for the winter warmer, since it was going to be in bottles, was to be high alcohol. So I was shooting for 10% alcohol. I wanted to be really clean, not hot or harsh, no fusel alcohol flavors. I wanted it to have a pleasing ester profile. So I was leaning towards using an English ale strain. I wanted to add a little bit of spice from the malt. So there's some rye in this beer, but the beer is also spiced. And I didn't want any phenol, so I just wanted a really clean fermentation, no Belgian characters or spice or clove. And because of our brewing schedule, especially around Christmas, I wanted the beer to have a quick tank time. And a 10% alcohol malty beer isn't necessarily conducive to a quick tank time. So that's sort of how I landed on using the Kvike yeast. A couple final notes on this style. I say AKA an American old ale or English strong ale. Winter warmers are just kind of the American version of those English styles. So really this beer is an English strong ale at heart that I then spiced. And one note, all of the samples that you are tasting at home, that's the unspiced version of this beer. I saved one keg because I loved the unspiced version so much that so the spiced version gets released to the public, but this unspiced version, no one's ever got to try. So that's what you're tasting tonight. And we can go to the next slide. So I am not a microbiologist or a lab person. I can do cell counts in the lab, but I am not a biologist. So some of the information I got from these awesome resources, the Kvike yeast trend in the United States is really attributed to one person, and that's this guy named Lars. And he has kind of a legendary blog called Lars Blog, and I put a link here. It's really extensive. So he is Norwegian, and he started to catalog the history of Norwegian farmhouse breweries. And I haven't spent a lot of time on his blog, but I hear all these people talk about it. So if you want to go down the rabbit hole, that's where you should go, because he started to write and catalog all of these farmhouse breweries, and he got some yeast labs and some American brewers interested in that brewing tradition, which really is pretty unknown. The other resources that I would point you to is the Omega Yeast out of Chicago. They sort of ushered in the commercial strains of the Kvike yeast. And there's a podcast that the founder of Omega Yeast, Lance Shaner, he does a podcast on the Mead House podcast. I listened to it today. It's not super in depth, but it's still an interesting talk. And then there's a beer scholar interview. If you search that in YouTube, you can find that interview. So that's another interview with the founder of Omega Yeast. Next slide, please. So we'll just go through a brief history of the Kvike yeast. It originates from Norwegian farmhouse breweries. We're familiar with the great lineage of European brewing traditions, but generally we're thinking of Germany and Belgium. Norway has a decades-old rich brewing tradition of farmhouse breweries, and to Americans, it's relatively unknown. When we take our beer journeys, we go to Belgium and we go to Germany. So that the Norwegians have been brewing farmhouse ales for a long time. And because it's sort of an insular community, these strains have sort of developed there, and they have really, really unusual characteristics that we'll get into. So tonight I want to talk about the history, and then we'll go into some of the process benefits for the home brewer, why using a Kvike yeast can really help a home brewer specifically, how you can use the yeast. I'll go through the recipe for Clark, and we can talk about some of the flavors in it, and then we can just kind of, if you have any questions for me, we can, I can take questions, and they can be about Kvike yeast or just in general LVC questions, or any questions are welcome. So we'll just kind of get into it. Okay, so yeah, back to the history. Like I said, Belgium and Germany get a lot of the attention, but Norway had and has a rich brewing tradition. One thing that can happen when you have sort of insular communities brewing beer for a long time is that the yeast strains will mutate, and they'll become really, really original to the specific location that they're being used. And one example I wanted to talk about is you can see how fast yeast strains mutate and change on a homebrew and on a small scale. So one example is flocculation. In our brewery, we reuse yeast from tank to tank. We pitch yeast multiple generations. But if we are not careful and we're selecting yeast only from the bottom of our tank, we will be self-selecting for early flocculators. So the yeast that drops out first, if we take that yeast and brew with it again, it will be more prone to flocculate early. And if we do that a number of times, by the third or fourth generation, the yeast will just fall out of solution and won't ferment. So in just 4 brewing generations, 4 times of using a yeast, you can select for yeast with certain traits. Now, flocculation is not a major flavor characteristic. It's not a genetic trait that's changing, but it does show you that yeast selection has a huge impact on how the yeast changes over time. So in Norway, these farmhouse breweries, they are brewing for 10, 20, 50, 100 years, and they're selecting yeast from beers that tasted good to them and beers that were successful. So if they brewed a batch that was terrible, they wouldn't be reusing that yeast to make another terrible batch. And what this resulted in is a yeast strain or yeast strains that are super temperature tolerant, and that's really abnormal. It probably came about because they didn't have good temperature controls. So fermentation temperatures would be really high. If it tasted bad, they wouldn't reuse that yeast. So the yeast was being self-selected for a really high temperature tolerance. And that's really the main point of these yeasts, and that's why they're an outlier, is that they have just extreme temperature tolerance. They're also selecting these strains based on flavor profile and performance and health. And the Kvike yeasts are known to be really resilient, not just to temperature, but also to alcohol. And in that talk from the founder of Omega Yeast, he mentioned how the Norwegians propagated their yeast. The yeast strain was so hardy, they had what they called a yeast ring, which apparently is a wooden ring that they would dip in the previous batch of beer. Yeast would attach itself to the wooden ring, they would dry the wooden ring out and they would just store it dry. And when they brewed the next batch of beer, they would steep the wooden ring in the next batch of beer and inoculate the next batch of beer. So as homebrewers, we're trained to be super diligent on sanitation and yeast pitching rates and oxygenation. But if you use a yeast strain that is this hardy and tolerant, you can go as basic as drying yeast on a wood ring and then just dipping it in the next batch of beer. So I thought that was a really cool and interesting point. Yeah, let's go to the next slide.
We do have a quick question.
Oh yeah.
Does it seem odd that a yeast that wants high temp comes from a very cold part of the world?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I would have to think about that. I'm sure that there are some articles about why that is. Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. It could be that the yeast strains were naturally temperature tolerant, and so that that's what tasted best, or that the brewers didn't have good temperature controls and let the beers free rise. But yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I'm sure Lars blog has the answer, but I'll have to dig deeper into it. One thing about a lot of the questions is my answer to the technical questions will probably be I don't know. So practical application is more my forte, but yeast genealogy and genetics is a weak point. So I feel a little out of water in this talk. So hopefully I don't make a fool of myself. So yeah, I do know that.
When you were talking about how you could self-select quick flocculating yeasts. So how do you guys use the whole yeast cake? Was kind of the question.
Yeah, so we are, and most professional brewers use conical tanks. A conical tank is really helpful when handling yeast. So we're fermenting in a large vessel, and the bottom of the tank has a conical bottom. So the first yeast, the early flocculators that are going to flocculate first, they're going to be at the very bottom of the cone. So we get rid of those a couple different ways. We'll do a day 2 dump. On day 2 of fermentation, we'll do a really small dump and we'll just dump out some yeast. It can be as little as a quart of yeast. So we're just getting rid of some of the early flocculators so that they won't be used later. And then as the yeast cake develops in the bottom of the tank, when it comes time to pitch, we'll also get rid of the first yeast that comes out of the tank. And visually, you can see where the healthy yeast is. So that's the main way that we control not selecting for early flocculators, is just to get rid of them at early fermentation. So yeah, we don't use the entire yeast cake. We're selecting the specific yeast that we want. So the outlier for these yeast strains is the temperature. Let me see if I can get back to my video. So these yeast strains are really remarkable because they can ferment a range from 65 degrees to 105 or 110 degrees, which is really crazy. The first time I used the Hornindal Kvike yeast, when I get in, every morning when I go to the brewery, I kind of check on the tanks, make sure everything's operating normally. The easiest way is I put my hand on the manway, and if it's nice and cool, then I know the glycol system is working and the beer is fermenting at 65 degrees as it should. We have a temperature panel I can check as well, but I put my hand on the tank and I know it's nice and cool. So the first time I brewed with the Kvike yeast, I put my hand on the fermenter and it was not just warm to the touch, but hot, which was just a really bizarre sensation. And these yeasts can just handle this high temperature. So one of the hardest, I would say what I tell people is the biggest hurdle for homebrewers, and oftentimes the biggest difference between a home brewer and a professional brewer, is temperature control. And temperature control can be really difficult. I'm sure there's a lot of members that have elaborate setups for controlling fermentation temperature. I've seen everything from window units in closets for controlling ambient air, to Keyser setups, to even an aquarium pump in a water bath with the fermenters soaked in that. So there's all these ways to try to control the fermentation temperature for homebrewers, and it's really difficult, but it's really, really critical. What this yeast, Kvike yeast, what's really awesome about it is that you can just forget about temperature control altogether. So one of the most important things for a home brewer to do, you can just say, we don't care. We'll knock out at 88 degrees. We'll let it free rise to 95 or 100. And we don't have to have all these tight controls. And I thought that's, as a home brewer myself, I thought that was a really awesome application, because if you say, we have this problem where we have to control temperature, we can throw a lot of process and equipment at it, or we can use this yeast strain and just forget about it entirely and eliminate that variable. And so that's one of the things that these Kveik yeasts allow you to do, is not just brew beers with really interesting flavors, but to take control of one of the hardest variables to control. A lot of the buzz about, is there a question?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. We have a follow-up question to the yeast cake question, whether it was
Yeah,
yeast or the trub at the bottom.
that's a great question. When we knock out from the fermenter, a little bit of trub or trub goes into the fermenter. So on that day 2 dump, we're also getting rid of that. We try, because our kettle is designed pretty well, not a lot of hot material or proteins get through. So we're not so worried about that material, but on that day 2 dump, it does come out with the early flocculators.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Then we
Yep.
have another specific question on which strain we're using at LBC.
Oh yeah, the only strain I've used is the Hornindal Kveik yeast. And I have a slide later that goes through a couple of the other strains available. I checked Omega Yeast's website today. They have more strains now than they did the last time I looked. The Hornindal yeast strain is actually at least 4 different individual Saccharomyces strains. That it's just a blend. So I think part of what Omega is doing is that they have this blend of yeast strains that they isolated from a Norwegian farmhouse brewery, and they sell it as a blend because that's what that brewery is using. And now they're isolating the individual Saccharomyces strains from the blend and selling those as individual strains as well. And let's see where we're at. Sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth a little bit here. Oh yeah, so the way that the Kveik yeast really caught on here in the United States was through IPA brewing. Like I said earlier, IPAs are the largest market share, or largest part of the craft beer market. And they're exciting. They're really awesome beers to brew. There's a lot of innovation, new hops, new yeast strains. People are trying really adventurous brewing methods. So bringing in a sort of an esoteric, but also adventurous yeast strain is really appealing. So that's kind of how these yeast strains are being branded and sold as hey, try this in your next hazy IPA or to enhance your hop flavors. So high temperature fermentation can promote ester production, and that's what's going to enhance your tropical fruit flavors in your IPAs. And in these yeast strains, the ester profile, according to Omega Yeast, is stable across the fermentation temperature spectrum. So if you ferment at 70 degrees or you ferment at 105 degrees or 95 degrees, the ester profile of the beer is going to be really stable. You're not going to see a lot of variation. And for me, that's really amazing. To think about a yeast strain that has that wide a range is really abnormal, something I've not really run across. So if you're trying to get some additional fruity flavors in your IPA, you can use these yeast strains, and the temperature doesn't really affect the ester production. You can go to the next slide. So one of the main points I wanted to make in this talk was there are many brewing applications that are going to be really useful for Kveik strains outside of IPAs. There's going to be a lot of material online about how to use them for IPAs, so I thought I'd go a different direction. The other interesting thing about these strains is that they are non-phenolic, and that's really important, especially when we're brewing malty beers or high alcohol beers. I just have a definition here of what fusel alcohols are and what phenols are. So with these strains, you have stable ester production across the temperature spectrum. They are non-phenolic, so you're not going to get those Belgian-y flavors or the off flavors, Band-Aid, smoky, medicinal, cough syrup, spicy, clovey. So they're non-phenolic, and they have really low fusel alcohols. And this is really counterintuitive for a hot fermenting yeast. If anyone wants to taste some fusels, pitch a California ale yeast or an English ale yeast at 88 degrees and let it free rise to 95 and then taste it. It will taste terrible. And what you're tasting are the fusel alcohols. It just tastes hot. So to have a yeast strain that ferments at 95 and controls the fusel alcohols is really amazing. And the high temperature has another effect on fermentation, is that it speeds it up. You can do incredibly fast fermentations because it's so hot without the drawback of producing fusel alcohol. Is there another question?
Yeah, we have a few from Facebook and possibly one from Zoom.
Yeah.
First question is, do you employ the hot or cold break for yeast nutrition?
Oh, that's a great question. We use yeast nutrients. So at 15 minutes left in the boil, I will add some Whirlfloc to help with protein stabilization and hot break. And then we add a product called YeastX, and it's from Brewer Supply Group. And I base the amount of YeastX on the gravity of the beer. And primarily it has SAN, free amino nitrogen, and some zinc. But it's a pre-packaged additive that just ensures we're going to have a really healthy fermentation. And that's how we go about giving our yeast the nutrients that they need. So we try not to add much in the way of hot break. And then the cold break is we transfer everything through a heat exchanger. So the cold break is going to be in the beer. So there's probably plenty of free amino nitrogen for the yeast health, but we go ahead and add the YeastX anyway.
Cool. And then the other question is, could Kveik be used for Belgians?
I would say, let's see, how do I want to answer this? You can do whatever you want whenever you want it to do it. So if you want to brew a Belgian beer with a Kveik strain, you should definitely go for it. I think what you're going to find is that it's not going to be what I always refer to as true to brand. You're going to be missing out on the phenols. Belgian beers, generally phenols are an off flavor. If you brewed an English style or even definitely a German style beer and it had phenols present, it would be an off flavor and a bad beer. Belgian beers, because of those yeast strains developed in this almost the same farmhouse scenario that these Norwegian strains did, the phenols were part of the flavor profile, but because the yeast were selected based off of flavor, the phenols work with the beer. So if you brewed a Belgian beer with a Kveik strain that was non-phenolic, it wouldn't taste very Belgian-y, I guess is my best answer. So yes, you can, but it may not taste Belgian-y.
Ah, okay. And then for the Zoom question, we have two Gregs. Which Greg had a question? Okay, well, the other Greg had wandered off, so you may continue, Sam.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. We can kind of talk about brewing applications. This is really the most interesting part for me. So what's amazing about these Kveik strains is that you can brew a 10% alcohol beer really clean, really fast, which is not something that I'm used to using an English ale strain. And in the interview with the founder of the Omega Yeast, he talked about doing some trials with the Kveik strains early in their process of isolating and getting ready to sell them. And they just pushed the yeast as far as it could go just to see what it was capable of. And they did a 5-day Berliner Weiss. They soured the beer overnight. They boiled it, pitched yeast, and they had it in a keg and were drinking it 5 days from pitching the yeast. Because you pitch the yeast at 88 degrees, it free rises to 95. The Berliner Weiss was probably 3 to 5% alcohol. It probably reached terminal gravity within 30 hours. And because it's such a clean fermentation, they added cooling, put it in a keg, and they said it tasted like a clean Berliner Weiss. So they brewed from start to finish a fully packaged beer in 5 days, which is really amazing. and offers a lot of opportunity for brewers to turn things over really fast. That's not my primary goal, just to move things through, but it can be a useful tool. And I think for homebrewers as well, it's probably definitely not your main priority. I'm sure you are all flavor first brewers, but if you need to brew something fast, or say you run out of beer and you want beer for the next weekend, you could try a 5-day pale ale. So it is, you have that capability with these yeasts, which I think is really cool. I know that they're also now being sold to be used to ferment cider, mead, and seltzers because they're non-phenolic and because they ferment so cleanly and so quickly. They're a good candidate for those type of products. Cider and mead could benefit from the extra ester production, and seltzer will benefit from the super fast, alcohol tolerant, and non-phenolic nature of these yeasts. They're also selling a yeast. Omega Yeast is selling a yeast that they say can be used for a pseudo lager. You ferment it at a lower temperature in 65 to 70 degrees, and you can produce a pseudo lager. It's not going to taste like Weihenstephaner, but it's going to be a clean lager type beer that you could turn over in 10 to 14 days. So there's a lot of room to play around with the brewing application for these Kvike yeasts. Let's go to the next slide. I pulled some info. These are just two of the strains that Omega sells. I use the Hornindal Kvike because it's the strain with the highest ester production. So I did bring it in to brew an IPA. The IPA that we brewed with it was called Strange Dreams and Weird Science, and it frankly was a very weird tasting beer. I used a lot of experimental hops. They were new German varieties I got from Hophead Farms. So I don't know where all of the wild flavors in that IPA came from, if they were primarily from using a Kvike yeast or if they were from using these hops that we'd never used before. There was Styrian Wolf and Grungeist and a couple others. The beer was heavy, heavy hay, and it was a really polarizing beer. Some people loved it. There were a few people who said it was their favorite IPA they'd ever had, and some people said it was not for them. So it was a very polarizing beer, and I used that same yeast I pitched it from the cone to brew Clark, the beer that we're tasting tonight. So I was really pleased with the way that Clark came out, which leads me to believe that the IPA, the wild flavors in the IPA were probably due to the hop selection. So yeah, as you can read here, it says clean enough for both American and English styles. And that was my goal with this version of Clark. I wanted to have I was going to use an English ale strain, but instead I can use this Hornindal Kvike to impersonate an English ale strain and produce a really high alcohol beer that was really clean. And then the Lutra that they're selling is isolated from Hornindal Kvike, or Kvike. The Hornindal Kvike is at least 4 different strains of yeast. So they're starting to isolate individual ones and selecting for just those flavors. One note about the Hornindal Kvike and why it's a good candidate for hazy IPAs is at least one of the Saccharomyces strains in Hornindal Kvike is non-flocculent. So when you dry hop during active fermentation, it has a tendency to stay in solution. So if you're looking to get some haze in your beer, this yeast is a good candidate because it has at least one non-flocculent yeast to help you keep some of the proteins, hops, and yeast in solution. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. Are we still good on questions?
We do have one more.
Yeah.
That question is, do they harvest and repitch Kvik yeast in the same way as they do with their regular yeasts?
Maybe, do you think when they say they're meaning LBC or brewers in general or Norwegian brewers?
Go ahead and clarify, Dale.
Yes, I mean LBC, you guys.
Yeah, so, and can you just rephrase the question one more time? Sorry.
Do you harvest and repitch the Kvik yeast in the same way you do the regular yeast?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We do not have a lab at Lawrence Beer Company, so we pitch yeast in I describe it as a rustic way, but very, very effective. I don't have a lab, so I can't take a yeast sample, and I could do a cell count, but I can't measure a yeast slurry and pitch a specific amount of slurry to hit a specific yeast cell count number. So what we do instead is I take an average cell count from slurries and I pitch by gallons. So I will move a certain number of gallons of yeast from one tank into another from cone to cone with our sanitary hoses. And that's how I move yeast around the brewery, and we'll just do our calculations and determine the gallons gallons of yeast to move to hit our theoretical pitching rate. And we move yeast that same way for every beer that we repitch. Because we're a brew pub, we end up handling a lot more yeast strains than a production brewery. A lot of production breweries would have one house strain, then maybe a lager strain, and then maybe a specialty strain that they bring in. Just offhand, we generally have at least 5 different strains on tap. So we're not regularly rebrewing with the same yeast week to week. So we oftentimes don't repitch. We will use a fresh pitch because we're oftentimes not brewing with the same yeast in subsequent weeks. So when we can reuse yeast, that's great. But oftentimes we have to do a fresh pitch so that we can use our different yeast strains.
So I have another quick question. I've actually used the Boss strain a couple of times and really enjoyed it. Been impressed with the speed of fermentation. But one of the things that I noticed for me in my process that the time that I gain in fermentation, I kind of lose chilling the beer back down. And so
interesting.
I try to stick to the whole sort of 6 degrees a day. And so my question is, for one, do you adhere to that for all of your beers? And do you think it's any different for Kvike?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I learned all of my, I guess I cut my teeth professional brewing at Half Acre Beer Company in Chicago. And they were almost exclusively an ale brewery and a production brewery. So we were trying to turn over our tanks in 14 days. So we would do a hard crash on our ales, mostly pale ale and IPA, at day 12, and they would be cold for 2 days, and then we would package it. So we did a hard crash. So we would move from fermentation temperature, 65 or 68 degrees, directly to 31 degrees. And it helped us move beer through. My personal beer philosophy is with ales, especially hoppy beers, doing a hard crash is not going to adversely affect flavor at all. When you start to get into lagers, especially really delicate traditional German style lagers, we do a step down for those because the yeast strains are still active when they're cold. But when we're brewing ale yeast, especially with a clean California ale yeast, the yeast is finished primary, it's finished secondary, it's flocculated. So taking it from 65 down to 31, and with the cooling equipment that professional breweries have, that can be as quick as 12 hours. I don't think it's going to have much of an effect. So I think there's a time and a place to step down beers really gently. But for the most part, especially with IPAs and pale ales and hoppy beers and ales in general, I don't think that is such a big issue. But I do know there's a lot of brewers that would say that's sacrilege. So that's just my personal philosophy.
Cool, that's good experience. I'm going to go turn the fridge down right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so
I'm going to interrupt with a quick show and tell. So I actually have a package of the Hornindal yeast from Cotton's Brewing Company, or Cotton's Brewing Supply downtown. So if you go into the store, this is the packaging you're looking for. A big bright red box with what looks like a cheetah on the front and a peach.
So yeah, since we're all drinking Clark, the unspiced version, I just talk a little bit about that beer specifically. It is a 10% alcohol beer. The goal for that beer was for it to be malty and have some spice and mimic an English ale yeast. So I used the Hornindal Kvike strain. I pitched it at 88 degrees. We let it free rise to 95 degrees. It resulted in a clean finished beer in 8 days. I think I ended up letting it go to 12 or 14 days, added cooling, transferred to the bright. I pulled off the keg that we're all drinking right now. I pulled that off and set it aside, and then I added our spices and then bottled and packaged the beer. So yeah, I wanted to just look at the recipe a little bit so you could see what I was thinking when I brewed the beer, and that's on the next slide. So I added the percentages in the middle column. That's going to be the most useful for the homebrewers because I'm brewing on a much larger scale. So this has just under 1,000 pounds of grain. So the grain weight's not that helpful, but the percentages are going to be helpful. You could scale this up for any size batch that you brew on your own systems. So the target gravity was about 24 Plato. Our target finishing gravity was 6 Plato. I think our attenuation for this beer ended up being 5.6 Plato. So we were within half a Plato. So very close on our target. And our original gravity was 23.5. So we were only a half a degree Plato off on both our target and finishing gravity. And that just shows that the yeast performed as advertised. I looked at the apparent attenuation of the yeast and calculated how I thought it would perform, and it ended up performing almost exactly that way. So I thought that was a really good sign. I used 80% or just about 80% of Maris Otter. When I brew a malty beer, I like to use a base grain that's going to add a little bit of a heavier bready base. Could use two-row. I just think that using Maris Otter or Golden Promise or Vienna or Munich, one of those malts, just to add a breadier base is kind of helpful. And then 4% rye malt. Since I was brewing a spiced winter warmer, I thought, let's make the malt bill have a little bit of spice. And then I layered in some crystal malt. I like to layer in crystal malt. So I use both C77 and C120 and some Cara rye. So double dipping both in the rye and the crystal malt. And then aromatic and special B can fall under the crystal malt category. But aromatic malt is going to be intensely malty. So you might find that in like an Oktoberfest style beer or a Marzen. And then special B is going to be intensely caramel flavors. So I wanted to enhance the maltiness of this beer, and that's why I use special B and aromatic at about 3%. So what you're tasting in this beer is the Hornindal Kvike yeast and these, I don't know, 6, 7 grains, and just a dash of noble hops. So this really is the heart of this beer. It's the Hornindal Kvike yeast strain that is impersonating an English ale strain with this malt bill. Yeah, and then that's the talk I have on the Kvike yeast strain and how we've used it at the brewery. I did want to mention a couple things unrelated to the Kvike yeast and then kind of open it up for questions. I do have to go before too long. It is my son's bedtime and we have an infant. So my wife is being gracious enough to let me skip out for an hour or so. So I still have, another 15 or so minutes. But I did want to do a quick, as a representative of Lawrence Beer Company, I did want to do a quick LBC brewery plug. Our patio is open. We have an outdoor tent. So if you want to come and hang out outside, you can do that. Our indoor dining is also open. And bring your mask. But we would love to see people come in. And I just want to talk about what I have coming up in the brew house. We brewed a milkshake IPA that will get pink guava in secondary fermentation, brewed with London 3 ale yeast. So it'll be a hazy IPA with a little bit of lactose and Mosaic Citra and Idaho 7. So that's sort of the rotating IPA that's coming up. And I'm just released Cruise Master, our American lager. It's kind of our summer beer, our really our most beery beer, I describe it as. And I'm really proud of it this year. It's an American adjunct lager. I switched from using corn last year to using rice this year, and I switched up the hopping to using mandarina hops, and I really love that beer. It seems funny to be really proud of the American adjunct lager that I'm brewing, but I'm really proud of that beer. It just came out, so that's what I've been drinking. And yeah, it released yesterday, so that's kind of the beer that I'm most excited about. And then next week, we are going to be brewing a Belgian table beer. The style I'm really interested in trying. I've never tried it before. I'm sure some of you have brewed beers Belgian table beers are a similar style. The table beer moniker comes from the idea that it was sat at the dinner table and that everyone at the table would be drinking that beer, from the children to grandma and grandpa and everyone in between. They can be as low as 0.5% alcohol up to 5%, but that would be really too high. The one I'm shooting for is going to be about 3.5%. And I just brewed our raspberry Berliner Weiss again. And today I pulled off a keg of the unfruited raspberry Berliner Weiss, so I can add that to this Belgian table beer if I want to give it a little bit of tartness. And then I'm still deciding on whether to add some spices, which would be coriander. I'm kind of leaning away from doing coriander, but I would like to add some either grapefruit peel or some sort of citrus zest in secondary to make kind of a zesty, really low alcohol Belgian beer brewed with a lot of wheat. So it could be just like a very low alcohol session beer. So that's kind of what I'm most excited about coming up at the brewery. And yeah, I just wanted to, again, thank you all for coming and kind of open it up for specific questions about Kvike yeast or general questions about brewing or Lawrence Beer Company or anything.
Before we do questions, I'll add to your plug for Lawrence Beer Company is that you guys have been gracious enough to offer us one half-priced beer of our choosing per visit. So that's just a perk for a paying member as well. And also, I want to.
Don't use it on Tuesday. All our beers are $3 on Tuesday. So come on Tuesday, drink $3 beers, and come on a different day and use your half-price beer coupon.
And then also, I just want to thank you, for coming and talking to us. It's great content. But yeah, we'll open it up for questions.
Hey, really appreciate the beers you donated for the tasting tonight. Really appreciate that. I know you probably put a fair amount of time in putting those together and getting them out to us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I was excited to do it. I'm sure this virtual format is really difficult. So I thought it was really awesome to be able to get a beer in front of everyone that we can all taste at the same time and talk about the recipe and talk about some of the process used. So, and the keg was just sitting there waiting for an opportunity to be used for something just like this. So it worked out really great.
Well, you are getting a lot of silent raised glasses in the Zoom call.
Oh, good.
We do have a question about the recipe, wanting to know whether you used RO water with only a bit of calcium chloride, or did you use another water source?
Yeah, we do not have an RO water system. We use Lawrence municipal water. It first goes through a sediment filter, 5 micron to get rid of any, mostly sand, iron, any large deposits. And then it goes through an activated carbon filter to get rid of mostly the chlorine. And then I keep in contact with the people at the water treatment facility. So they will let me know about any variations. And then I have some water testing equipment. So I will test our water tends to swing pretty widely on the chloride and sulfate content from season to season, and especially after a rain with field runoff, and then especially when the reservoirs are discharging. So when Lake Wilson discharges and we get that water from all that limestone coming through Lawrence, it changes our water profile. So I can adjust for that by changing the calcium chloride or the gypsum or the calcium sulfate additions. So I don't have a lot of ability to control the other variables in water, but the important ones for flavor, we get rid of chlorine, and then we control our sulfates and our chlorides to get them in the range that we want.
Cool. And then we have another question specifically about the yeast as to what you think its downside might be to using it.
Yeah, I think the downside is the downside is the unknown. If you have never brewed with something before, it could have an unexpected result. So I don't think there is a downside to using it. It may not end up working how you hoped it would work. But I think in the spirit of experimentation, trying something new is really awesome. The other thing is, like I said before, I'm a flavor first brewer, and I'm assuming most of you are flavor first brewers. But sometimes it's fun to try out something purely in the name of process, and not caring. Not caring is the wrong way to put it. To make a process change, just to make a process change, and try to keep the flavor the same. And so using these yeasts to try to do something like a 5-day Berliner, for example, if you can make an awesome Berliner in 14 or 16 days, that's great. But just for fun, why don't you try to make one in 5 days? And it may taste exactly the same, but I love sort of doing those process experiments, as well as trying to change and experiment with new flavors.
We had a quick, real quick, we asked yes, no, and then a more in-depth question. So yes, no, is that a Lisa Grossman painting behind your head? We have a fairly well-established artist amongst our mixed, and the more deeper question, somebody asked if you know anything about how generational changes might happen if you reuse generations over and over again.
Yeah, the generation question is a great one. This is a Lisa Grossman painting. It's a great eye. My wife and I got this at the Lawrence Art Center auction this year. 2020 was a great year to try your hand at online charity art auctions, because the in-person bidding was not possible. And so we, instead of traveling or taking trips this year, we bought some artwork. So I strategically placed myself right here so you could all look at it. And then, yeah, about the yeast generations, at Lawrence Beer Company, because of our multiple strains of yeast that we're always using and not repeating them very often, we generally, I think the most we've ever gotten in as far as generations for one yeast strain is 3 generations. So we've brewed with it, pitched it again, and pitched it again. I think most production breweries, they don't go past 10 generations, because you start to see some mutation. And so you might see attenuation drop, or flocculation will change, or the flavor profile, ester production might start swinging. And you're not going to get a crazy mutation where all of a sudden your clean fermenting yeast is going to be a super ester bomb, but you're going to see some drift in the performance. So I'd say the rule is about 10 generations. At Lawrence Beer Company, we don't go over 3, and that's mostly because of our brewing schedule. I would go more than that if the opportunity arises.
I'm going to jump in because I had a quick question for you. On the Clark, on this specific beer that you shared with us tonight, which is delicious. The 10% is really well hidden in that, in my opinion. I don't know if you can attribute that to the Kvike or what, but my main question was, like, you pushed it through and you packaged it on the 8th day or whatever. Do you know if there were any fusels or booziness, like, initially on that 8th day, or if there was a time period where you had to wait for it to get this drinkable? Or
yeah, I would absolutely attribute the how clean that beer is to that yeast strain, and that's why I thought that this was worthwhile to spend some time tonight talking about it. I was really impressed with the performance of that yeast, and that's really why I pulled off this keg. We had already decided to brew a spiced winter warmer, so that was my task. But when I tried the beer without the spices, I really didn't want to put spices in it, because I was like, this beer is so good. I really love this really clean, malty beer, but we said we were going to make a spiced winter warmer, so we have to spice it. So I pulled off this keg because I thought, like, this beer is worth sharing. And I absolutely think it's from using that yeast strain. I have a brew sheet here. I don't have the 2020 brew sheet. I have the 2019 brew sheet, and I did give it a long time in secondary. This beer did not get packaged until day 25, but I have notes here on day 10 or day 7. It was at terminal gravity, and the tasting notes from that day show that it was a clean finished beer. So I don't think the secondary aging had any effect on the flavors in the beer. And on day 7, it had already dropped to 78.8 degrees. So fermentation produces a lot of heat. So it free rose to 92 degrees. That was our set point. Our set point was still 92 degrees on day 7, but the beer had already cooled down to 78 degrees because of ambient temperature. So it was done. It was finished at that point.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's crazy.
So yeah, my challenge, I think, to the brewers here is, I know William's here. He likes to brew stouts, and I'm sure he uses some English ale yeast. I would use one of these Kvike strains with a recipe that you make a lot with an English ale yeast, and see how it performs side by side, and then see if you can make it in a shorter time period, or brew. I mean, the 5-day Berliner idea just seems like an awesome idea, or a 5-day blonde ale. It's really, I think, being a flavor first brewer, you want to focus on the flavors, but to be able to brew a beer in 5 days, it just would be awesome.
I'll just comment quick on that. Basically, I did an experiment just a few weeks ago where I brewed a 10-gallon batch of a pale ale. I used some experimental hops, but I did a 5-gallon with Kvike, Voss Kvike from Lallemand Law Brew, and then 5 gallons with USO 5. And there's really, side by side, there's really not a difference between the beers, like, whatsoever. The Kvike, I fermented at 95 degrees, and it was finished, within about 36 hours. And then, I let the US5 go for longer. But yeah, I mean, the differences are pretty much nil between the two beers, which was really surprising to me. But
yeah, and it's been interesting that the focus for these yeast strains has been their opportunity to be used in IPAs to enhance hop flavor. And I think that is a potential, but I think you're not going to see any new ground being broken there. And the thing that's not been talked about as much is how these yeast strains can keep flavor the same while improving process. So that's kind of where the angle I came at this talk with. I'm sure we can make some wild new IPAs with these strains, but I don't think it's going to be uncharted territory.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I know Josh and Jake were debating about whether or not to have a competition on how fast they could make a beer, but they decided not to do it.
Well, if you do that competition, I will say whoever uses a Kvike strain will probably win.
So I think that concludes our seminar. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your beer. It is great, and everyone seems to be having positive reviews on it, and we really appreciate the time you've taken to talk to us.
Yeah, it was a blast. I want to, if you'll have me back, I will come back, and I want to start sitting in on these meetings monthly. Anyways, I just got to carve out time in the bedtime routine. So again, I really appreciate the invite. I want to stay for the tasting portion. I have Josh did get me the 6 beers that we're going to taste tonight. I will have to sign off, but I will taste them on my own, and I'll get to enjoy them that way. So I hate to be rude. I don't want to just dine and dash and get out of here, but the babies are calling.
Well, you are welcome to come back if possible.
Okay, I'll check back in.
Before you go too far away, Sam, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, we're only testing beers 4, 5, and 6 tonight. So if you want to save 1, 2, 3 for next month, Sam, we'll do those together next month. We're doing 4, 5, and 6 tonight.
Okay, that sounds awesome. I will crack those. I'll probably crack them open tomorrow at noon. That sounds great.
And early warning, Chuck told us that if you open 5, do it over a sinker outside, because apparently it's very effervescent, we're told.
thanks a lot, Sam. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay, that concludes our live stream for the moment. We are going to move the beer tastings off the live stream?
Nope.
No?
Lynette, I'm going to interrupt you. I think that we
Never
changed
mind.
that idea last minute. So we are going to do the official tasting on the live stream as well. So.
Oh, okay. Well, ignore me.
All right. Well, speaking of the tasting, I will tell you now is the opportunity to go grab your beers. So I went and cheated and got mine here, but we'll give you a minute to go grab your beers. We are doing 4 through 6, as Frank said. I know it's a little confusing, but the order in which we received them versus the fruits, we ended up numbering 1 through 3 before we had the whole thing put together. So 4, 5, and 6 will be the beers for tonight's tasting. And if you're getting wild and cracking them ahead of time, as Frank did note via Chuck, 5 is a little aggressive. So just be prepared if you open it. If it's well chilled, it's pretty, I didn't think it was as big of an issue, but some people may have, spicier bottles than others. All right, well, Frank's away for just a moment, but we'll talk about what we had happen. If you weren't, at the last couple meetings, we did take 6 folks to sign up for spring fruit brews. And we decided there's, multiple fruits that come in season in the spring, but we picked 2 to focus on, mainly because of ease of availability at the store. In that case, there were strawberries and mangoes. And we did assign 3 brewers to each, what I called team. So we had team strawberry, team mango. And other than that, the brewers were free to do what they wanted with them. I was curious to see if we were going to get, strawberry basil saison or, a mango stout. There's some oddball stuff you can definitely do with it. I will preview that tonight's strawberry round did turn out fairly tame on that front. No black peppercorn saison strawberry, thing going on or anything like that. But I do want to say thanks to all our brewers. We'll mention their names at the end, and we will reveal who brewed what. But for now, we're going to keep it secret. I did just start the AHA slide since Frank changed that slide for me. So go ahead and pop on your phone or your computer and enter that address. I will copy that in the chat here. And we're going to have a little bit of interactive like we did before. And we can go ahead and answer these questions while we're all getting in. These are kind of a couple break-in questions while people are still having a chance to pop in here. And so it looks like we got 6 in so far, 7 with 4 answers. So people are trickling in. And we are going to use the AHA slides rather than taking verbal input for everybody, just for the sake of keeping the flow moving and everything with that. So do join in via the AHA slides if you want to weigh in on our beers. Yeah, I was getting ready to here in just a second. I figured I would, I'll share screen. I'm going to jump back and forth between my copy of the slides and the AHA slides. I can say it 10 times fast. All right, so we're answering the question about the Clark. It looks like it's pretty close to split 50-50. Can answer that question, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one here because it is on the seminar there. Have you brewed a Kvike beer or winter warmer before? Just getting some interest on, if this is some new territory for folks or not. Looks like it's a pretty broad split out there. So that's good experience for everybody then. Because everybody had something to learn from that. All right, and if you've brewed with Kvike before, have you used a Kvike ring, the wood ring he was referring to re-pitch before? I think that got asked in the audience questions, so I was curious to see if anyone had done that in the club. Maybe we could have them give a little talk about that. Well, looks like so far nobody has yet, but there's me and one other who's going to give it a go here soon. So we'll try it this summer. I bet you the other one's Josh, if I had to gamble.
It's not actually. I clicked too quick. I am interested in trying. That maybe we could pass a Kvike ring around.
That would be
how that would work. But.
Some generational Kvike tryouts.
That would be cool.
Yeah. All right. Now, go ahead and I saw several people already crack beer number 4. Go ahead, and I'm going to crack mine here. It's just got a little bit of carb there, so it's not a real aggressive one. Don't have to run away from it. Get a good pour so you can get some head on it, or, you know, see what's going on. Take your aroma here. I am going to switch slides. The AHA slides is still going to be up. Go ahead and submit those answers, but I'm going to kind of guide us through what we're looking for here on the slideshow. So talk about the beer itself. So beer number 4 here, the base style was a Hefeweizen. You can see the stats here for the gravity, and it was using a frozen fruit edition in the amount of 4 pounds. So 4 pounds of strawberries in this one. As far as appearance goes, see, I'm seeing some notes come in, but I'm going to run my mouth before I go read them. You know, when I see color, it's a pale, kind of a red straw. Josh, I don't know, you're welcome to weigh in since you and Lee are both my tasting partners here. Or you can just answer in the chat. But to me, it's like a rosy pale, mostly pale straw. Didn't really get much head on it. It's fairly low CO2, low volumes of CO2. I definitely get strawberry on the nose.
Yeah, it smells nice.
Fairly clean esters wise goes. So I'll jump back to the AHA slides for a moment as people are answering. And it looks like, yeah, we didn't get much head. Some protein haze, slight head. Somebody got low carb. Yeah, so definitely the carb is a note there. Light, cleanliness, though I see a couple counters to cleanliness. Slightly strawberry, so, and berry there. So yeah, we're all getting similar aspects to it. I'll come back to that in just a second. Let's talk about what the Hefe category looks for here. So as far as the gravities go, you know, we nailed those. So we're good on all those notes. As you all noticed, there is a little bit of low carb. The yeast phenols, and esters, there's a little bit of that clove flavor, I think, on the background with the strawberry, but I'm not sure I get much of the other stuff there. It's nice, clean. If you carb this one up and had it outside in the hot summer day, it'd be a really good beer for sure. All right, anyone else there? Cream ale, question mark, slightly yeah, okay, so we read through all those. I'm gonna go ahead and flip to beer number 5 here. I know you're like, we just drank number 4. Feel free to finish answering. I'll leave the answers up here for just a second. Get a little more. But I am going to go pop my number 5. And, you know, after we get done, while we're all chit-chatting, we can always go back to drinking these beers. So pour yourself small glasses. That way we can talk about the flavors themselves and have time to get to all those. I'm going to quick, while you're answering things here, see who's pinging me, because I imagine it's someone in the club messaging me. All right. Looks like I got some pictures of somebody enjoying some of these beers with strawberries. And somebody even in a message commented about the geyser warning being very useful. I am taking the gamble here, by the way, as I crack number 5, sitting in my office at a computer desk with my work laptop in front of me. So let's see how this goes.
Don't do it.
It was a little geysery, huh? So luckily I've got some glassware there. But yeah, it's splashed up a little bit. But unfortunately, this is where I have the camera and set up, so I'm kind of limited in my scope. Luckily, the work laptop did not take a hit, so that's the most important thing, right? But we can talk about beer number 5 since we're cracking them open, and obviously the effervescence would be a strong comment on it. And then after we talk about the beer here in a minute, anybody else have problems with the AHA slides? You submit and then stuff doesn't show up. I've had to submit multiple times, a couple times. So if you're not seeing your answer there, I may be the only one on that note, or if someone else is having trouble, feel free to submit your stuff multiple times. We want to see those answers. We will talk about, I'll get the slide up here. Is everybody seeing, Frank, are you seeing my actual slide here?
I do.
Okay, since I'm bouncing around a lot, I'm trying to make sure that everyone sees what I'm doing, you know? And this, okay, that's why I was keeping those two windows on that screen in particular, so. All right, so let's see, brain just went blank. Okay. So just like we had the Hefe before, this is a wit beer. That was the common theme with tonight's beers. Folks really liked the Hefe or the wit action. So clearly wheats and strawberries got people's attention. With this beer, this one does have high head retention. Not only is it really carbonated, but at least on my sample here, the foam still coming out of the bottle is very thick. So it is very potent head retention on there. As far as color goes, you know, it's fairly similar to the past one. You know, pale. I do see a little suspended particulate in mine. It's probably related to the aggressive carbonation, pulling some of the sediment off the bottom there, you know, propelling that outward. So as far as clarity goes there. Aroma, I'm definitely get the strawberry. This one I get a lot more hop derived esters. I don't know, it's not a peppery, but there is some sort of hop ester going on here. I'm trying to put my finger on it. Let's see what people are answering so far since we've talked about this for a minute. All right, so we got some answers here. We got effervescent, spritzy, fizzy. Somebody else commented on the little bit of sediment here. This one is redder than the previous one. Let's go side by side. I would agree with that when they're side by side like that. Sour berry, that's an interesting one. So yeah, tart. Belgian character. I wonder if someone's getting something in particular, the yeast character to that then, I guess. Kind of falling in line with what I was thinking. So here we've got both slightly phenolic and clean fermentation. Well, let's go pop over to wit beer here. Talk about our wit beers. So kind of similar, some well-designed beers that, look, they nail those BJCP targets pretty darn well. Our gravities and even our IBUs in this case are right on. This one we're looking for, you know, the strawberry is the fruits are gonna influence the color. So don't take all of our appearance notes dead on because these are for non-fruited versions. So in this case though, you know, you gotta, it says starch haze and yeast, which the milky white, yeah, I could see this appearance, which somebody said on this one, a golden haze. That's the note I was looking for there. So kind of in line with that. As far as the aroma goes, did anybody mention the malt character? Because besides the phenolic stuff, you can definitely pick up just a little bit of sweetness there. So this one I don't get that like spice, the coriander clove as much necessarily as that last one I did. I got a little more in that one, probably because the strawberry is maybe a little more potent on this.
I'd be curious if the brewer used a artificial strawberry flavor, because that can sometimes come out in the nose.
This one was, now they didn't say if they did other stuff, but they did state their fruit was frozen. So they did use a frozen fruit, but they could have also used additional product, you know. And I thought this was, no, it's the next one that they gave a dosage. I didn't have the fruit weight on this one. I had the fruit weight on the first one. And there was some guidelines when I passed out the assignments. I kind of gave people some other internet reading that gave some various dosage rates, but everyone was free to choose their own adventure on that front. All right. Well, we've talked about wit beer for a minute here. And my sample is calm over there. The bottle is not geysering anymore. So let's move on to number 6. You can keep sipping number 5 for just a minute. I'm gonna real fast look at this, see if, okay, nobody else popped in, that's fine. Just want to make sure everybody's answers get read. If I'm gonna ask for input, I wanna highlight your input. So I'm gonna flip this over to the number 6 slide, but I am going to jump back to our presentation real quick. Will people start popping in some answers about number 6 here? Go ahead and crack that one. It is another wit beer here. They called it a blonde wit beer. Let's see, where is, oh, bottle is over here. Desk's getting a little crowded. That is the blue cap. If our handwriting's not, if you're hard time reading our handwriting, that is the blue cap for number 6. So, and that one is just moderate carbonated, doesn't explode. So you can open with normal caution. But here in this sample, if you look, I'm getting decent carbonation, a moderate head there. Had a little bit of hiss when I opened the bottle. As far as, you know, you look at it, you do see quite a bit of bubbles rising. So it's got a pretty good carbonation. The head is a off-white, I would call it. It's not quite a white, but pretty close. Definitely not a tan or something like you'd see on a darker beer. Another beer with a little strawberry color. This one's probably more of a protein haze than the previous two. The other ones I felt were just a little more sediment-driven haziness. Ooh, but the strawberry, I can smell the strawberry on this one. I don't know if anybody else agrees, but to me, this is definitely the strongest, most potent strawberry smell. You've had it with all of them. I think it's steadily climbed maybe as we go through them. But this one definitely is the strongest strawberry. And if you notice here, they used 2 pounds of frozen but thawed fruit per gallon, and they did specify that. Other people could have thawed theirs, but they did specify their fruit was thawed. Whoops, here we go. I jumped right. This one's a little higher gravity from what I saw in the notes there. So this one a little strong. As far as our wit beer goes. But that could be part of the fruit addition. They didn't, let's see, did I miss? No, they did specify the fruit was after final. So the fruit was a secondary addition there. That's right. I tried to keep as many notes when people emailed them to me and detailed it out here as best as possible. Let's see what some folks are saying about this one. More pink, more natural strawberry, mild strawberry. We're seeing a balanced carbonation level. Very, very, see, the smell is definitely hitting people on this one because we're seeing a lot of nose and aroma content. Let's see what people are thinking about the taste. You know, we've seen some notes about the carbonation, it sounds like. Let this click. I'm going to jump back real fast just to the wit beer, talk about it again here. So this one's definitely flavor. I'd say this one, despite having the higher ABV, and oops, I'm jumping around. Yeah, here we go. Never mind. My slides are kind of confusing me here. So the actual beer is this. The guideline is this. So despite this being a 7% beer, I'd say it still has a fair bit of the grain sweetness to it. You know, there was plenty of sugars to go around such that it didn't totally dry it out to hit that ABV. Whether or not that was intentional or not. Otherwise, for me, the strawberry, because when you do get these fruit beers from my nose, it's a little harder to get some of these more mild notes about, say, the yeast phenols, the notes there about like spicy or peppery notes. Let's see if anybody else is able to pick those up. All right, we got a few more comments here. That blonde flavor. A corn note, as someone said, butyric acid. Let's see, pink. So as far as color goes, people definitely did note that pinkness, or reddish to some in that case. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump to our next slide here. We kind of played out beer number 6. Keep drinking these. See what you think about them all here. You can pick your favorite of tonight's strawberry beer, and you can select multiple. So if you liked all of them, you can check them all. If you liked a couple of them, you can do that too. But just curious to see since we did ended up with 3 similar by style beers, what people thought of them. So far, it looks like we've gotten 8 of 12 respondents answered. 9, so we'll let everybody go here for a second. There were definitely attributes I thought strongly about each one. So let's see. All right, we've got 12 out of 12, so I'll move to our next slide here. Our next beer round is going to be mango beers. Have you brewed with mango before? Or are you going to experience your first mango home brews here next month with us? That is your beers 1 through 3. So keep those cold and come back for our next round with mango brews. Definitely looks like, I wondered if there'd be somebody with like yes many times. There's just some mango fiend, but it looks like it's something several people have tried and a lot have not. There's our 12 or 13 responses, so everybody's pitched in here. And that finishing out our tasting here with our final survey questions we've done a few times now. Brewed, let's see, I have, now I just realized I have not. Shame on me, I'm a no. That was supposed to be rectified on Big Brew Day. Instead, I cleaned my garage so I could brew at a future date. All right. And then I'm going to flip. What's your next upcoming brew? Answer that, but I'm going to jump slides here to tell us who brewed what tonight and thank all of our brewers. Beer number 4 was our very own LFK Brewing with Lee. And then we had beer number 5 was Dale's. And beer number 6, which was our third, I know it's confusing, was Greg. Thank you for submitting those beers tonight. I see some applause in the audience there. And so I won't tell you the order of next month's. This is not the order of bottle labeling, I promise. We're keeping it secret till you taste them. But next month's brewers were Clint, Jake, and Travis. Thank you to all 6 folks who brewed for us and got all those samples bottled and turned in so we could pick up all these delicious beers. Let's see, that is the last tasting slide. Before I let Frank have it back, I'm going to finish the last survey questions here. So it looks like whatever Ryan brews is one of the results. I'm guessing that is Mr. Brian. I do see a mango beer here, black pepper nutmeg. Okay, I'm really intrigued. So when we get done with the meeting, whoever that is, I think I need to hear more about that. Looks like we see a few Kavik items in the audience. Unsurprising given the content tonight. And lager, it is summer season. We had Crispy Boys last month. What, Frank? Oh, never mind. All right, we're good. Thought I heard a question interjection for a second there. All right. And our final, we're getting closer to the end of virtual meetings. I think last month we talked the church was still a little while out. But for the interim, what can we continue to do to make these virtual meetings more interactive, more entertaining, more for you? Smell-o-vision. I'm on board with this. Only as long as it's not like that 4D cinema where you're gonna get sprayed with mist, but it's really just beer, or something like that. All right, well, I'll leave that slide up. People can submit stuff, but I am going to turn it back to Frank for the screen sharing there. just so we can share our final slide, our play out slide, and I'll turn it back to Lynette.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone who brewed and showing up. We have a lot of newer to me faces in our Zoom meeting, which is great. So we are going to officially conclude this, and you can hang around and chat. Thank you.
I like beer cause it is
Okay,
good.
we're
I drink
good.
beer because I
Frank
should.
gave the
If
okay
there
to say
was a
Canadian.
song to sing, I sing it and beer you bring. I drink beer when I am sad, cause the beer it makes me glad. Now there's nothing left to say, so let's go drink beer. Beer is good, beer is good, beer is good. And stop, beer is good, beer is good, beer is good. Let's go drink some beer. When it's warm, it tastes real crappy, but cold beer will make me happy. When I throw up on the floor, I can go and drink some more. They say beer will make me dumb. It are go good with pizza. Now that we have drunk some beer, let's go drive a car. Beer is good, beer is good, beer is good. And stop, beer is good, beer is good, beer is good. Let's go drink some beer. Dude, I think you've had enough. Let's go drink some beer. I am drunk, drunk as me. I am drunk. Woo! I am drunk, drunk as me. I am drunk. Woo! I am drunk, drunk as me. I am.
All I wanna do is drink beer for breakfast. All I wanna eat is them barbecue chips. All I want is someone just to try to protect us. You can try, but you never wanna try to defect us. Honey, yeah, I'm free. Mama, baby, what was the bomb? All I myself up.